time of the return of politics. Because one problem was that politics disappeared from many of the areas in the past 20 or 25 years. And to, let's say, there was the shyness of politicians to do politics. Mm-hmm. And it was seen to be as specifically beneficial to say I'm a non-political politician. No? And I think this was, to a certain extent, the problem, that politics was appeasing this neoliberal development in one or the other form, and at least those that are disadvantaged by the development, they had the impression already for a longer time that politics didn't offer an answer. And therefore this disenfringement took place with the rise of right-wing populist parties or with the decrease of participation in elections. So I would say it's not the question, do politicians today have the democratic legitimation for change? The question is, in my understanding, could they be longer in their positions if they are not doing change because people are demanding it right now?
Richard, on that subject?
If only I knew.
We just have literally a few minutes. We're under time constraints imposed by another debate this evening that many of you will want to be home to watch. I'm going to just collect 2 or 3 quick questions from the audience. Be very brief, and then patience. Over there, we'll start, gentlemen. Please, you had your hand up.
Question for Chancellor Rosenbaum about the crisis of social democracy these days and the question of solidarity. One of the criticisms from the right wing in Austria during the campaign and before it is that the Social Democrats have become alienated from their base, that they become too intellectual, too elitist, too far away from their actual constituency, which used to be the working class. As you know, many working class voters have moved to the right in previous elections. It seems that social democracy in Austria and other places has been very successful in terms of social mobility. Many leaders have come up from the social ladder, from the bottom to the top, like yourself and like von Fanitsky, etc. As I remember, when the social democracy had leaders from the upper class, like Bruno Kreisky, one didn't hear these kind of accusations. Do you think there's a crisis of alienation in people who become leaders who have left behind their base and don't have contact with it anymore in social democracy?
No.
Good.
Good.
I think it's this is a polemic, but what is true is that social democratic parties are mainly challenged by these right-wing populist parties. They are not challenged by traditional right-wing parties. And all those parties appear in different forms all around Europe. And this is not a question of the personal alienation, but it's a question of the political result that was achievable under the conditions that we had in the past 20 or 25 years. But
yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
But if you are coming to the elections, to the next Austrian ones, I'm quite optimistic that Social Democrats again will be #1 again.
There was a gentleman there with the
Yes,
microphone.
thank you very much for coming. It doesn't work. Okay. I actually asked... Oh, it does? I'm sorry. My mother, who happens to be sitting on the board of one of the major European banks, she was actually joking with me about how these people who do regulate those markets are always kind of so much slower than the people who actually create all those new financial vehicles. So you, Mr. Gusenbauer, how do you think that they will be able to regulate those new, those frontier developments, the forefront of financial markets, and what will they do? And I have another question for Mr. Sennett.
Just one.
Just a small one, please. How do you instill ethical self-reflection? How do you teach that?
Thank you. We'll have food sent in, and about 10:30 we'll be able to hear the. Well, I don't think you get in any social system that people resolve to be good. They learn how to do good and to act well through conflict. That's my own view. And the teacher of ethics is resistance. And that means that to get more ethical institutions, you have to get more people with the power to countervail against the powers of those who dominate. The notion of getting a moral businessman is a wonderful, or businesswoman is a wonderful idea, but it's just not a social reality. And I say this to you because, particularly in the United States, the notion of self-reform is so strong in this culture that it's often applied to situations where it's absurd. If we want more moral businesses, we have to have businesses in which the power of capital is opposed by labor or by the public. And that's the same logic for the public owning the businesses that it's now going to bail out. A change of heart is no way to get better business, is to get more ethics in politics as well. I mean, Chancellor Gusenbauer happens to be an extremely moral man. But there may have been, at some point in in Austria's recent history, councillors who were not so moral and ethical. So it's an important issue because a lot of the it's the same thing that went on with Enron, greedy businessmen, rather than a system which hasn't provided any resistance in it. Anyhow, that's my answer to your question.
Yeah, I think your mom is right, that there is, of course, a permanent race between innovation and the desire to regulate. This is why I made this distinction, that we need tougher regulations for the huge institutions that then will be not, let's say, in the frontline business. I mean, if the possibility for the huge institutions to leverage is much more reduced than it is right now, this is, of course, limiting the business of these institutions. And this is why I make this differentiation that you need regulation for those that have a systemic importance, right. And you make no regulations for those that are so small that they anyhow are just working on basis of their own risk.
Well, there's one last question here.
I actually wanted to follow up on a question about globalization that Professor Katznelson put to you, Professor Sennett. And that is, the question that Professor Katznelson asked was, taking the devil's advocate position, that perhaps globalization has produced enormous wealth among people in populations in India and China that have never experienced such wealth before. Maybe there's something actually quite beneficial about that. Maybe that kind of wealth allows them to stand up at the Doha round against the North to see their interests protected. And you answered by discussing inequality. You answered by saying that, in your experience, in fact, and I thought it was a very interesting discussion, that inequality is not so socially painful that people desperately need to escape inequality. But I don't think that the people who, the 200, 300 million people in China and India who have risen into the middle class are concerned about inequality. They're concerned about poverty. I mean, they're escaping poverty. in this rise of globalization.
Correct.
And is there not something, would you say that there is a possible risk of damaging that escape from poverty, or limiting that escape from poverty, if one were to enact the kinds of restrictions on the movement of global capital that you're describing?
Well, you see, I wouldn't look at it as a restriction on, this is a very good question you ask, and I frankly don't know the economist's answer to this. But I think the notion that there's a zero-sum game between having businesses in Europe and the United States respect the jobs of their own workers and doing economic development in the second or third world, that those two things can't be practiced together, seems to me wrong. Or at least it's a good idea to experiment with ways of creating jobs here whenever a job leaves. That requires a very active state. What it is fatal to it is the notion of saying, well, we lost that work, and there was a logic of losing it which is implacable, and we can do nothing about it. And what I've note about this is that there has been a kind of fatalism about the path of neoliberalism, as though it had to happen in just this way and no other way. So I'm not arguing that, we should keep our jobs and impoverish people in India. What I'm saying is that there's been a kind of passive notion that if a job is lost here, it's fate, and you can't do anything about it. And that's been a terrible problem in Britain, and I imagine in the United States it's been a terrible problem as well. So that's the point I'd want to make to you about this. This is not a story set in stone, right? It's a story in which there is agency, and that's what we've been talking about.
Last word belongs to you, if you wish it.
Well, to open up the new debate on the beneficial sides of globalization would be interesting, because there are those. And I think the issue is not about yes or no to globalization. I think how can we get a proper direction to globalization in order to enlarge the benefits for more. And I think there are some fundamentals to be set up, and there are a lot of examples all around the world how you could maximize the social value of an economic process. If the process is just based on the ultimate greediness of few, then your possibilities will be limited. But if you have, let's say, a proper side that profits should be profits, okay. And there should be also nice profits. But some are too exaggerated, and they are then limiting the possibilities of the other. And therefore, I think that, of course, you're right, that Doha did not function because of the new defined interest of some of the countries where we could get millions and millions of people out of the poor. And therefore, I think a talk about the recomposition of financial markets should not lead into a debate to say no to globalization. Yeah. I think to make globalization more human, that's the task for us.
Please join me in thanking the Institute for Human Sciences, Chancellor Gusenbauer, and Richard Sennett.